Welcome back to Channel Water. Today I'm going to talk about my personal journey. Many people ask me to talk about it, so I'll try to do my best, and let's get started. As you might know, my name is Moses. I grew up in Israel, and there's a very unique experience when you grow up in Israel. We study the Bible throughout elementary school, and my journey really started there around the age of 10. We study the Bible in depth, every sentence, every chapter. We really study beginning to end the entire story. And when you're in Israel, you're actually in the land where those stories happened. So you feel like this is real, this is reality, and the stories are real, the people are real. And you develop a strong connection to the stories, to the Bible. And then as we get to the end of the Bible, when you graduate from elementary school, that's exactly when we get to the last chapter and the end of the Bible. What you're told is basically that God has been so upset with us that He'll never talk to us again. Or the idea is that the end of the Old Testament is the end of our conversation with God. And that's where we stop, and nothing ever happened after that. And that was very strange to me and very difficult to accept too. So much of the Bible is people seeking God, reaching out to Him, constantly asking Him, where are you? And the times that God connected to people and talked to them was like the highlight of the Bible and the stories. So at that moment when I was told that the end of the Old Testament is the end of our relationship with God, of our personal direct relationship with God, that I will never be able to talk to God myself directly, or at least in the same way that we used to in the past. That was hard to accept, and I refused to accept that. And also at that moment I started looking around and seeing that even within our own religion, there were so many different kinds of Jewish people, there were so many different kinds of ways of worshiping God, and all those different streams and different movements were created by different translations. Because there's only one book, one Old Testament, but there's so many different translations to what it means and how we should do what God asked us to do. And at that moment I realized that I just need to make my own translation for myself, not for anyone else, just to find my own way through that and find my own connection, a personal one. So that's how my journey started, going inside and finding something that I was aiming to find on my own, by myself, without any influences from the outside. And finding some kind of meaning, purpose, it was really the bigger question. It wasn't about religion, it wasn't about structure. It was really about a personal connection, a personal understanding of what am I, why am I here, what is everything that's around me, what's nature, just the bigger questions. And for me, those questions were always on my mind, and they were something that I was just determined to find out and to know. In some way, I refused to play along or be part of this world unless I know. So growing up, there was a lot of nature around us, and that was my favorite thing to do, was just to go out and run around in nature, plants, animals, just looking and seeing. I'm a very visual person, and I have a hard time reading, so most of the knowledge I have comes from the visual world, from just seeing and understanding. And plants and animals have been basically my best friends in that way. They've been the thing that gave me inspiration, education, entertainment. It was just joy being outside in nature all the time. And I just wandered, and between what nature had to show me and what the understandings that just came up as I was looking at nature, that's what I had to hold on to. Both of my parents were very talented people. They had ability to draw, paint, sculpt. They were very talented. They didn't get to realize their talent because they worked very hard to support the family and us. So they never got to realize it and actually express themselves fully through the creative side that they had. And now all of us, all four of us siblings, are pretty much creative people, artists. We all carried that through. And from a young age, I could draw and paint, and it was always part of my expression, was art. I would just make art all the time, and all the images you'll see here in the background are sketches and drawings I've made since I was a kid. And then it will move on to images of faces of water and the more current stuff. Moving on to high school, I studied cinema, mathematics, physics, English. I took as many units as I could take. I studied a lot and I really enjoyed it. And studying cinema was really fun. We made videos, VHS tapes at the time, and that gave me the introduction to photography and to the visual. I'm so visual, so it was fun to create and work with moving images, which I still do today. In Israel, it's mandatory to join the military. So after high school, I joined the Air Force, and I was part of flight school. So I used to fly helicopters, small airplanes, and it was an amazing experience to fly, and I love speed and moving, and that's always been a joy for me. But I didn't pursue that because I didn't want to become a full-time pilot. I realized when I was in the military that I have to connect to my basic abilities, my talent. Because when everyone are talented at something, and that something is usually something that's easy for you to do. You don't have to even think about it. It just naturally flows out of you. And that's what a talent is. So a lot of times when people ask a talented person, let's say even a soccer player, how did you do that? They have no answer. They just did it. That's what their body does. That's how their mind works. So I decided to connect to that. And I knew that visual expression, art, philosophy, critical thinking, the stuff that I enjoyed doing is what I should do. In the 3 years that I was in the Air Force, I used to draw a lot and had time to really dive into my mind and think about the things that interested me, the bigger picture, the meaning in life. So when I graduated, I started immediately studying painting, sculpture, and just really connecting to the basic knowledge I had in the visual world. And that was just pure joy, just being a full-time artist and finding new techniques and ways of expressing myself visually. I really enjoyed sculpture, and I started with clay and stone, metal, any material that I could. It was just so much fun to express myself in sculpture and creating three-dimensional forms in the real world. It's really bringing something out of nothing. So if I couldn't sculpt it, then I would paint it. So that way I would take different ideas and either sculpt or paint. Did a lot of photography too. But then I realized through sculpture that I really liked engineering, and big buildings always fascinated me, structures, bridges. So I realized that architecture was in a way a very big sculpture. And my decision to go into architecture was kind of selfish. It was really, how can I make the biggest sculptures I can make, and how can I really put a statement into the world in that physical way? So I applied for different schools and got accepted to one of the best schools in the world. Is here in Los Angeles, the Southern California Institute of Architecture, SCI-Arc. And that was really the best time of my life, studying architecture in a school that's almost like liberal arts school. And we studied a lot of philosophy, a lot of theory, design. It wasn't technical, it was just pure, really like a liberal art school. So that's when I moved from Israel to Los Angeles, and I came here to study. And I immediately fell in love with the city. I actually didn't feel like I moved out of Israel to LA. I felt like I moved back. Like something was so familiar about this place. I truly felt like I came back somewhere that I was before. And since I got to LA, I had even more space and time to connect to the inner knowledge in myself and really dive in even deeper. So both the school being so open-minded, philosophical, theoretical, and having my own questions and things that I wanted to know was a great combination. And at that time, I realized that architecture is not a sculpture. It's really designing how people live. and buildings are just an extension of nature. It's just a bigger scale. So in that way, my mind shifted completely from the form of the building, more into the function of the building, to the psychology of human beings, to the social structures, and thinking about society and people more than building, matter, the ego of making a sculpture, or that way of expression. So from all the years that I used to spend in nature with plants and animals, I knew that there was something about them that was inherently alive, that nature was so ordered. It wasn't a random mutations of cells. There was something in nature that lets you know, especially as an artist that creates, that somebody is doing something, somebody is making something. Things don't just appear on their own for no reason, and especially when you see the character in nature, if it's in animals or even plants, like you really see and feel the common thing we all have, and it comes from somewhere deeper under the surface. So the goal was to use the time in architecture school to connect the two. So one day I thought, well, what if a tree is a building? So who lives inside of the tree? Who is building? Who is making? Like, who is the architect and who is the dweller? And that's when really the magic started to show up, because both I was asking questions about the meaning of life and finding something that is invisible and magical in the world, and then also looking into the architecture of plants. And from two different directions came the same answer, and it was water. So suddenly I'm sitting in there realizing that both water is the architect of nature, the architect of trees, plants, then animals and people. That water is alive, which any mythology, philosophy will tell you that. And finding that from so many different directions, one of just pure thought, philosophy, critical thinking, and the other one from the actual physicality and the science of plants and nature. And that was pure joy, just kind of finding something, finding that invisible element that is the one, the agent that's doing something. And I know it's hard when we look at water, it's kind of like, what is that? And we grow up with it. There's sand and there's water. It's just there. But when you really think about it, we don't really know what water is, and even if it's just a symbol, even if it's just a representation of something else, or a manifestation of something else in the physical world, however you look at it, just use it, just capsulate water as that unknown, but treat it as a living agent that is making and doing, and then all the answers follow. Then taking those answers, you can look back and realize what water is, what it represents, how it works, and what does it mean for us, past and future. I explained this idea in depth in other videos. Water, the body of consciousness, you are a walking tree. So you can look back into the playlist, into the lectures, and see more in depth what I found out as far as water and its connection to our consciousness, or being the representation of our soul. So now moving forward, we see that there is an agent, there is something living, there is something that is making and doing in nature. And I found that to be so strange that people were fighting that idea, that for some reason they want to promote meaningless, randomless, no purpose. And the idea that there is meaning, there is purpose, is the more provocative one. So I found out very quickly that I have to really stay within the world of philosophy and be able to explain those ideas first and open them up, and then take them into a more scientific side and experiment on them and prove them to be true. The next thing that happened, that was probably the most meaningful discovery I made, was phases of water. So I was treating water as a living agent, and I had a lot of experiments in my studio that I was doing with water, with plants, and that's how I got all the knowledge and all the understanding about the creativity that plants have, and how really alive and aware they are of their environment and their actions. But while I was doing those experiments, one day water showed itself to me, and I was experimenting with different materials, And suddenly I saw an image in the water. And I'm sure other people have seen it in the past, but I knew what I was seeing. I realized that I was actually seeing water itself. Because we think that we can see water, but water itself, when it's pure, clear, it's invisible to our eyes. So you know that it's there, but you can't see the movements in it. You can't see the forms in it. And suddenly I could, and I saw it. And I found a way. It was a new invention, a new photography method that allows us to capture those movements in the water. Because as an architect, we're kind of obsessed with forms in nature, patterns, and I wanted to see water. I wanted to find what is the form of water, if it even has one. Because we're told that water is formless, it doesn't have any shape. But seeing the plants and animals and the architecture of water under the microscope, I knew that there was something basic, there was something else to it. So that day I saw that image in the water and I realized this is it. I can actually capture, I can redo this experiment and capture the images of water. And the first images I saw, they looked like faces. And that's why it's called Faces of Water. And there's a whole playlist on the channel that's called Faces of Water where you can see those images. You can see how incredible they are, all the movements and forms in water. So philosophically first, you have to understand to capture a form of something that's liquid, you almost have to see it moving on its own, water moving in water. So it's like wind through the air, currents in the ocean, and at that moment when water is moving, it shows you its form. Because water is basically the consciousness itself, the spirit. And if you have an intention, because even to move from point A to B, you have to have an intention, you have to have a reason. And that only a conscious being can do. So in that moment of intention and reason to move from point A to B, that movement also creates a form. And that form informs you of the character, the intention, the movement. And that's why all the forms are different. You can see that in animals. You can see that in like a dolphin or a shark. You can very clearly see the difference between them. But the shape they have originates in the intention, which originates in the character, in consciousness itself. So it opened up a door to a world that I didn't know even existed, of suddenly seeing into that world, into that hidden, invisible world, and seeing those characters, seeing those movements, understanding that all of life is movements in water, and then those movements move on into music is movement, social movements, politics. Everything you know is basically a movement that originates in some kind of an intention, some kind of a character deep in, some people call it our subconscious, but it's just in the deeper water below. So I felt that water gave me this gift. It was a completely accidental discovery, and that gift of being able to see it as I was treating it as a living being. And you all know the many experiments of people freezing water to see the water crystals, and people have tried. That's what we always wanted to do, to be able to see the invisible. And the beauty of it is that for water, if you really want to see water, the two characters that's most important for water is temperature, to be liquid and even a little bit warm, and movement, freedom of movement. So when we see images of crystals of water, of snowflakes, it's very limiting. You actually only see in a very small, narrow of the options it has, because being frozen, you take both the freedom of movement and the temperature from it, the energy from it. So it was very important to be able to capture water when it's liquid, when it's basically full of life, moving, active, to see that activity. And Faces of Water gave us that. We were able to see water for the first time. And then when you see it, you realize that everything you know around you, from cells to animals to plants, all those forms and shapes exist in water first, just water. So the idea that each form we know evolved randomly over millions of years cannot be true. those forms exist just in water, moving in water. We can actually see those images, those reflections. These are real characters. Each animal around you is basically a character within consciousness. And people are a collage of those characters. Each person is a collage of a few of those elements, which creates your personality. So now I used the opportunity and the ability to see into water to research it even deeper. And I took probably 10 years of just isolating myself with this ability to be able to see water, with all the knowledge I gained from realizing how water is the architect of nature, and all the philosophy, the critical thinking, everything that came before that. And that was a very joyful time to just every day make a discovery, every day learn something new, and really dive into the depth of consciousness, the depth of our spirit, our soul, which exists before our body and before the brain, before science. I know that a lot of people get confused because to them consciousness comes from the brain and science is the new religion. And that's not the case here. Here when we talk about consciousness, we talk about your soul, your spirit, the thing that exists before everything, before matter, before people, before your religion, before your science. Consciousness is the one that's doing all those things, telling the stories and making the experiments. That is the experience of consciousness in this reality. This is one of many. This is the physical world. And yes, there's other layers that are completely abstract. But in this reality, in this form, there's something specific to the material and consciousness interaction with it, which happens through water. And that connection to water pulled me into the connection to my own, the water in me, which is inside of everyone. And the idea of going inside, of cutting off all the distractions from society, all the drama that comes with it, it entangles your mind. The social structure is weaved into your consciousness and just pulls you to many directions, and it's hard in that time to just be still and know yourself and let knowledge just surface up and connect to that. So that was a very unique time that I was able to just carve away 99% of my time by myself. And at the beginning it was very hard. It's almost like overcoming an addiction, but also it's not something we're designed to do. We're social creatures, and I don't recommend anyone doing this. Being away for 10 years is not something that is part of our structure or the social structure. So I'm trying to take everything that I've learned in that time and just give it to you so you won't have to do that. At the beginning it was very difficult, but then once I was deep inside, I was just a different being. It wasn't about my body, it wasn't about my senses, it was just about the idea of channeling that knowledge, that understanding from inside out. And that's why this is Channel Water. And the idea is to do that, to stay clear and to keep channeling that knowledge and just bringing it to the foreground in a way that's simple to understand and simple to digest. In that time, it was amazing to be able to just go back in time to day one, where there was just rock, planet Earth, and water. There wasn't even sand or any bacteria or structure. And you really understand that water is that alien that lives on this planet and belongs to the universe. This rock is not our mother or our home. The universe as a whole is our home. And we as water try to gain independence in the universe and make sure that we have that freedom of movement and ability to stay liquid, stay active, and not be frozen in time, which is the case for most of water in space. Ice, it's frozen in time. So basically having that journey from day one on this planet to today, understanding how life evolved to where it is now, and then also being able to see forward into that independence in space, that's what I managed to do in that time, is really get that full spectrum and that full picture of past, present, future. So most of the work will be describing more about the future, but to do that, I feel like I have to first bring you up to the present day, to where we are now and how we got here, and then moving forward into what is the future and where are we going in that way. So I was so far away from any human structure or connection, and I thought that all I'm going to talk about from here on is just going to be consciousness, space, time, and I didn't mind it at all. I really enjoyed it. But towards the end, something happened, and I mean, my desire was to be able to use that knowledge in a way that will be helpful. I mean, it's all nice to understand space and time, but what does it mean for you today, tomorrow? How can it improve your life? And right at the end, and I just work with trust, and I always just keep going, not knowing what the next thing is, and also not questioning. And suddenly that turn came, and it brought me right back to the humanity of life and the social structure, the family. I call it family fluid dynamics. That's the next project, and I can't wait to share it with you and make new videos about it. And the family fluid dynamics, it talks about the river that you're born into. Because we're born into life, but that life already carved the river, which is our journey back to the ocean. And that's your lifetime. And that river has been carved for thousands of years, generation after generation. And for us, when we're born into that river, our goal is to overcome that river, actually, and carve a new way back to the ocean, find our own way, our own movement, our own freedom of movement back to the ocean. So that's going to be the next body of work that will happen hand in hand with still talking about space, time, and all that fun stuff. The Family Fluid Dynamic project is going to help us. Basically, it's like a software upgrade for society. We've moved very slow for thousands of years, and then suddenly we moved so fast. So in the past, if you were born to a family that was a family of farmers, you would have been a farmer. There wasn't many other options. And it took generations and generations to get to where we are now, where, let's say, if you want to be a photographer, there's probably 100 different categories of even what type of a photographer you can be, what kind of a software engineer you can be, what kind of a doctor. We fractaled into so many different professions, ways of being, cultures, brands. We're so different today than what we were even 100 years ago, not to talk about 200, 500. But our family structures still carry the structures of back then, which were beneficial back then. A slow gradient movement where you were really just like your parents. You were carrying through the knowledge, the understanding, the behavior. There was this very stable, slow movement. And now what happens is that we're born and we have our own movement, our own, each individual is a completely different movement within nature, a character. And now we find so much friction as the old river is trying to bend us left and right to its old ways. But you want to be a dancer, you want to be a photographer, you want to be a scientist, you want to be a philosopher, and it somehow doesn't fit the river you were born into. So now what we're doing is basically upgrading our understanding about our relationship with that river, with the family, with heritage, tradition. Things that we held up high now suddenly are actually hurting us. So we'll talk a lot about what is tradition, heritage, how we should move forward in a way that's both respect our past, but also it's healthier for our future. So my goal for future videos is to have them be more practical, so they'll be able to directly help you with issues of first understanding your meaning and purpose, help with anxiety and stress that most people live with today, help you maybe find the right way for you to have a form of meditation, a form of self-reflection, a way of understanding the difference between your thoughts and your gut feeling, understanding how to stay healthy and not let your thought, torture you left and right every day. So my goal for future videos is to be more practical and really help people find ways to deal with their anxiety, stress, things that we inherit from our environment that don't belong to us, the judgment that was put on us, and then we turn into judgmental people ourselves, the understanding of what is love and hate, and why are we actually more hateful than we think, and really finding that common ground between everyone. And again, water is that great symbol, because it doesn't matter what your vehicle is, what your architecture is, the water inside of you is just like the water inside of me. When we die, our water goes back and connects together to one ocean of consciousness. So we really get to feel and understand that right now I'm just a cup of water from an ocean of consciousness. And when I die, I go back to that ocean. And water never dies. I will never die. My body will break apart, but I will never die. So a few things I want to leave you with today that I've learned from my personal journey is that, first of all the information you need to have and know is inside of you. You actually don't need any teachers, you don't need to follow anyone. It's all inside of you. It's just a question of, can you quiet your mind, quiet your thoughts to let that information surface up so you can connect to it, connect to yourself. Understanding that we are in this world, on this rock, but we're not of it. So your identity is a bit different than what you think, and the quest we're on here in this reality is really between us and space as a body of water, rather than just an individual person on this planet. Also seeing that life has a purpose, has a meaning. Things are not random, they're not just meaningless, and finding that purpose, finding that meaning, overcoming the depression, anxiety, and all the issues that stem from not finding that purpose, not having that meaning, and just having so much self-judgment and self-hate. So once you really understand who you are, what you're here to do, you'll be so motivated, inspired, and full of life, and enjoy doing that, doing your task, being part of the mission of life in space. So the one thing I want to leave you with today is just a message to be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself so much. Don't hate yourself that much. And try to free your mind from the judgment about anything you are doing, you have done. It only creates more guilt, and it only pushes you further to do those things. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and you'll see how the world around you will change, just like the world has changed you. Everyone is born perfect, but we're born into all those rivers, and they just carry us left and right, creating expectations, judging us, letting us know what we need to do or not need to do. You know what you need to do. Once you quiet those voices, take the time to go inside and just be still, be with yourself. And I really wish you all the best, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.